For decades, my life was devoted entirely to my family, especially my daughter and her small household. I spent years sacrificing my needs, my ambitions, and my peace, believing that's what it truly meant to love. I was convinced that giving everything of myself unconditionally was the highest form of love, even when it left me hollow inside. But after all those years, I came to realize I had lost sight of who I was beneath the endless roles I played. I sacrificed 3 things most of all: my career, my time, and my personal happiness. First, I gave up my job as a school teacher. When my daughter's family started struggling financially and emotionally, I took it upon myself to help raise her children, guide their education, and support her in ways I thought only I could provide. Teaching had been my dream, my voice, my identity for so long. It wasn't an easy choice to walk away from it, but I told myself it was temporary. A pause until my family stood on firmer ground. That pause stretched into years. Second, I worked tirelessly, juggling multiple jobs to fill the gaps in the family's budget. I cleaned houses, babysat, did odd jobs for neighbors, and took care of errands that others avoided. There was no rest for me, just an endless to-do list, fueled by necessity and fueled further by the expectation that I was their reliable safety net. Nights blurred into early mornings, days blended into weeks. No time to nurture friendships or rebuild my sense of self. When family needed me, everything else faded to the background. Third, I sacrificed relationships that could have sustained me emotionally. Years passed without seeing old friends. Invitations to social gatherings went unanswered. I withdrew almost entirely from anything that wasn't directly tied to the family's needs, because there simply wasn't room in my life or heart for more. Those who once knew me grew distant because I was always busy supporting others. My own longing for companionship, respect, and joy became muted, ignored whispers beneath the weight of responsibility. I normalized this suffering and self-abnegation as my duty. It was easier than admitting loneliness or frustration. Each day I justified my sacrifices with a quiet mantra: love means putting others first. I became invisible to myself, a ghost who cooked, cleaned, listened, and fixed, but rarely asked to be seen. The smallest acts of kindness toward me felt like indulgences, as if I didn't deserve more than the scraps of attention I occasionally received. My needs for appreciation, respect, and emotional connection were neglected until they shriveled, forgotten. Financially, I was precarious. Having left a stable career behind, I depended on whatever odd jobs I could find, and the minimal support some family members offered, though often begrudgingly. I lived in a cramped, run-down apartment they helped me pay for, but rarely visited. It was just enough to keep a roof over my head and food on the table, but nothing more. My bank account bore the story of years spent giving without replenishing, the numbers dwindling quietly but surely. Dependence on my daughter and son-in-law for short-sighted support deepened a gnawing sense of vulnerability, masked by polite smiles and forced gratitude. To the outside world, I was the devoted mother and grandmother, always ready with open arms, a warm meal, and endless patience. Neighbors praised my endurance. Acquaintances admired my silent strength. But I knew the truth they didn't. I felt invisible, like a burden growing heavier with every passing day. I was caught in a liminal space between their expectations and my fading sense of self. I saw myself as worn out, diminished, and forgotten, a woman swallowed by years of quiet surrender. 2 memories sharply illustrate who I was during those years. One night, I sat at the kitchen table watching my daughter and her husband excitedly plan a vacation they could barely afford. Laughing, carefree, they didn't notice the ache tightening my chest as I forced a smile, knowing my own joys had been shelved indefinitely. Another memory drags me back to a lonely birthday when last-minute plans changed, and I was left alone. The house was dark, except for the faint ticking of a clock, the only reminder of time passing as I wondered when I became an extra mouth, a presence tolerated rather than cherished. My apartment itself mirrored the quiet desolation inside me. The faded wallpaper peeled in the corners, dust gathered in forgotten nooks. The furniture was a mismatched collection of hand-me-downs, worn from years of use. Much like me, the kitchen fridge droned continuously, filled mostly with groceries for others. its hum a background to days spent cooking meals they barely acknowledged. Thin curtains struggled to block the intrusive city lights at night, the pale glow tossing shadows as restless and faded as my dreams. Living in this space, I dulled my pain with routines and the illusion that love was enough to cover all wounds. I told myself my sacrifices were noble, even heroic. I ignored the emptiness that settled like a shadow across every day, pushing down the simplest desires to be seen, valued, and loved for me, not just as a servant to their needs. I was trapped in a pattern of giving until there was nothing left to give, and accepting invisibility as the price of love. It was easier to believe I was doing the right thing than to face the loneliness of wanting more. But inside, beneath the surface of my undying loyalty to family, a quiet rebellion began to stir, the urge to reclaim myself and refuse the role of the invisible, extra mouth any longer. This was my life for decades, a life measured in sacrifice, overlooked needs, and silent endurance. A life that would soon reach a turning point I never expected, marking the start of a new chapter, where I had to choose between fading away or fighting to be seen. The day it all shattered arrived without warning, though in hindsight I could see the cracks were there long before. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind usually filled with the smell of fresh coffee and the laughter of family gathered around the worn kitchen table. But this time the air carried a different weight, heavy, sharp, and suffocating. The family had come together to celebrate the opening of a new store, one of those small businesses tightly wound with so much hope and hard work. My daughter and son-in-law had poured their dreams into it for years, and the event was meant to be a joyous occasion, full of neighbors, friends, and local supporters. I had spent the previous week helping prepare, cleaning windows until my fingers ached, cooking trays of food to share, and nervously rehearsing my small speech to welcome guests. The store buzzed with life when the day arrived, bright fluorescent lights bouncing off neatly arranged shelves stocked with goods. The air was thick with the scent of fresh pastries from the corner bakery and the faint hum of chatter blending with distant traffic noise. The polished wood floor felt cool beneath my feet, a contrast to the warmth of the crowd gathering around. I stood near the back, quietly observing, hoping to feel included amid the celebration. But soon, the atmosphere shifted. I heard whispers and felt the shift of eyes sliding past me, as if I was nothing more than a part of the furniture. Invitations for photographs and conversations skipped over me. My presence became invisible, relegated to the edge as if I were merely furniture cluttering an otherwise perfect scene. I tried to speak up, to offer small words of encouragement, but my voice felt swallowed by the noise, unheard and unacknowledged. My body betrayed the storm raging inside. My hands trembled so badly, I had to clutch the counter to steady myself. My stomach churned with a twisting nausea that made it hard to breathe. The familiar sting of tears threatened behind my lids, but I fought them off, unwilling to reveal the vulnerability so many seemed eager to confirm. Every laugh, every joyful cheer around me felt like a pinprick in my heart, reminding me how distant I had become. "Mom, could you please step over there and let us handle this?" my daughter said, her tone thin and sharp, almost clipped. The words landed like a slap, cold and merciless. "But I was helping with the invitations," I responded quietly, trying to mask the hurt. "We didn't need your help. You're just an extra mouth now," she said with a dismissive shrug, as if tossing away an unwanted burden. The phrase hung in the air, heavy and humiliating. "Please, sit down and don't interrupt," her husband added, not even sparing me a glance. The disregard in his voice cut deeper than any words before. I scanned the room for a familiar face, someone who might meet my eyes with kindness or offer a quiet nod of solidarity. There was none. Everybody was caught up in their conversations and celebrations, oblivious or indifferent to my growing isolation. 3 short exchanges crystallized my rejection. "Why is she even here? This isn't a place for freeloaders," muttered a distant relative as they passed by, loud enough for me to hear. "She's always hanging around, but she never really belongs," another whispered nearby, their tone cutting. "I don't think she knows when to step back," someone else commented with a sharp glance in my direction. Their words weren't loud, but their meaning was unmistakable. They made me feel small, erased. The The contrast was brutal. Around me, the store blossomed with life, music, flavor, and hope. Faces shone with pride and anticipation. The laughter and chatter formed a joyous symphony, but I was trapped in silence, a ghost locked apart from the celebration. I slipped away, the cold night air biting. As I stepped outside for a moment of reprieve, I pressed my forehead against the cold glass door, trying to steady the chaos spinning inside. My breath came in shallow gasps, quickly frosting the glass in a mist of desperation. No tears fell then, but my heart ached with a raw, aching loneliness. The house I had built around them, the sacrifices made in silence, crumbled in a moment of utter disregard. Yet amidst the sharp sting of humiliation, a silent ember flickered deep inside me, a sense of recognition that things couldn't stay this way. The edges of my invisible cage had been brushed back, the hidden wounds exposed. I knew in that tearless moment that my place in this story was about to change, whether they wanted it or not. Walking back to the dim apartment where I lived, each step echoed with the weight of betrayal. In the quiet, swirling doubts took shape. Why had I allowed myself to be so invisible? How could I reclaim the dignity denied to me so casually? The answers felt fragile and uncertain, but for the first time in a long time they were mine to seek. That day marked the beginning of an unraveling, of illusions I had clung to, and roles I no longer wished to play. It was a harsh awakening, brutal but necessary, plunging me into a new reality where love demanded more than silent sacrifice. It demanded self-respect. And although the celebratory buzz continued inside the store's walls, for me, the night was marked by aching solitude, the painful start of a journey toward reclaiming my own worth. The cold night air embraced me as I walked away from the brightly lit store, leaving behind the warmth and laughter that I had longed to be a part of but was barred from truly belonging to. The celebration had been vibrant, filled with conversation, happy faces, and the intoxicating scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods. Yet standing alone in the dim quiet outside, I felt invisible, erased by those I had cared for most. I had lived years quietly sacrificing, numbing my own needs, faithfully supporting my daughter and her family, believing love meant giving endlessly, without recompense. But now, the sharp sting of reality was undeniable. I was no more than an extra mouth, an inconvenient presence tolerated but not cherished, and this truth ignited a deep and painful clarity within me. I lowered myself onto a weathered bench nearby, the cold wood creaking beneath my weight, as if protesting the heaviness I carried. Flickering street lamps cast uncertain patterns on the cracked pavement, shadows fractured and shifting much like the pieces of my own sense of self. The distant hum of the city seemed muted, drowned out by the tumult of emotions swirling inside. Grief, humiliation, anger. But beneath it all, a growing ember of determination. My thoughts raced, retracing the decades of devotion and sacrifice. I had abandoned my teaching career, believing my place was by their side, nurturing the household, caring for grandchildren, and absorbing the financial strain that fell unevenly on their shoulders. I scrimped and worked multiple jobs, suppressing my dreams and friendships until I was nothing more than a caretaker's shadow. Through it all, I told myself my suffering was love, a noble exchange that asked for nothing in return. But tonight, that justification crumbled. I saw clearly that what I had accepted was neglect disguised as affection, invisibility masked as duty. Inside me, two conflicting voices warred fiercely. The first was weary, filled with years of quiet surrender. No one truly sees you. You have been erased by those you loved most. Who will believe your pain now? The other, nascent but growing stronger, spoke with a fierce resolve. I must believe in myself first. My value is not determined by their neglect or dismissal. I deserve to be heard, to be seen, to be respected. I tightened my fists to steady the trembling that began in my hands and threatened to overtake me. Tears pricked the edges of my lids, but I blinked them away, determined to embrace the strength flickering within, instead of drowning in sorrow. I drew in a slow, deliberate breath, grounding myself in the biting air and allowing the awakening truth to settle. Memories rose like broken shards, birthdays forgotten by family gatherings that never included me, silent dinners where my presence was barely acknowledged, countless hours spent serving without gratitude. These recollections no longer crushed me. Instead, they became plaques of endurance, symbols of a spirit that survived despite invisibility and neglect. I was alive. I was here. I was still capable of rising. The journey home was deliberate and symbolic. Each step across the rough, uneven pavement felt like reclaiming footing, moving from the shadows toward something new and uncertain, but filled with potential. The icy night air filled my lungs, not with despair this time, but with a cleansing promise of renewal. Entering my modest apartment, the familiar sense of aged wood and faded curtains enveloped me like an old friend. The worn, peeling wallpaper and threadbare furnishings whispered stories of survival and resilience. In the sanctuary of this quiet space, I allowed my long-repressed emotions to surface, tears falling freely, grief mingling with the nascent spark of hope, reflecting on the woman I had been, the overlooked, silenced figure. I saw now not a broken soul, but one awakening to her own worth. The scars I carried spoke of battles fought in silence, not of surrender. In the quiet of that night, I made a solemn vow. I would no longer accept being unseen or diminished. I would honor my own value, not because they recognized it, but because I did. The road ahead was daunting, unfamiliar, and fraught with challenges, yet a determined flame flickered steadily within me, sustaining my courage. With a deep, steadying breath, the crushing weight of years lightened, replaced by a vibrant pulse of resolve. I was no longer just the extra mouth overshadowed by their lives. I was reclaiming my dignity, my voice, my future. Under the soft glow of distant city lights, that fragile flame of hope blossomed, a promise not of sudden triumph, but of steady transformation. This was no end, but a courageous new beginning. The path forward was mine to walk, and I was ready to take the first steps. The morning after that cold, contemplative night, something within me shifted. The fog of years spent in quiet sacrifice and overlooked contributions had begun to lift, revealing a path I hadn't dared to see before. I woke with a newfound clarity, a steady determination that this pattern of invisibility, of being the family's silent burden, had to end. It felt less like a sudden burst of rebellion and more like a slow, resolute awakening. A deep understanding that I had the right to stake a claim in my own life, to be seen and respected on my own terms. I recalled a detail I had noticed months ago but never pursued. The store building where my daughter and her husband ran their business was for sale. At first, it had felt inconsequential, something outside my reach or influence. But now, in the fragile clarity of morning light, it became a symbol of possibility. If I could own that building, I could assert myself in a place where I had long been relegated to the margins. It wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about finding a foothold from which I could stand tall. Without fanfare, I began a careful investigation, making quiet inquiries, contacting a lawyer I had once known, and gathering information about the purchase process. Each step required composure and careful planning. I was charting new territory, cautious not to alert the family until I was ready. I had learned over decades not to expect support, so I moved in secret, gathering my resources and strengthening my resolve with every small advance. The process was slow but steady. I was meticulous, reviewing paperwork, negotiating terms, and preparing myself emotionally for the consequences of such an unexpected move. There were days when doubt crept in, whispering fears that I might be crossing a line, that I was risking too much. But the memory of that evening in the store, when I was dismissed and branded an extra mouth, fueled my determination. This wasn't about payback. It was about fairness, respect, and reclaiming the years I had lost. When the day came to sign the purchase agreement and accept the deed of the building in my name, I held the papers in my hands, overwhelmed by the weight of what they represented. This document was more than a legal transaction. It was a tangible declaration of my worth, a break from my silence and invisibility. Despite the nerves twisting my stomach, I felt an unshakable solidity inside. I was owning my place, not just within the family's world, but in my own life. When I shared the news with my daughter and her husband, their reactions were as intense as I expected. Their initial shock quickly morphed into protest and confusion. "How could you?" my daughter demanded, voice trembling between hurt and anger. "This will tear us apart." "I'm not here to tear anyone down," I said quietly but firmly. "I'm here to stand up for myself, something I should have done long ago. This isn't about dismantling the family. It's about respecting my role in it." Her husband's face tightened. A mixture of disbelief and frustration etched into every line. The unspoken balance of power that had kept me on the periphery was rattled, and with that came their resistance. But I stayed steady, refusing to back down. Then came the notices. Rent payments that doubled. Not out of vengeance, but necessity. Years of unacknowledged sacrifices had left me vulnerable, and I wasn't willing to continue bearing the financial burden alone. This quiet recalibration of our family's economics was a declaration. I would no longer be their invisible provider. As days turned into weeks, the tension within the family deepened. Calls and messages came, some pleading, others accusatory, but I remained calm and resolute. I was no longer the silent enabler. I was a woman, asserting boundaries with quiet strength. There were moments of doubt and loneliness, old fears whispering that I had jeopardized more than I realized. Yet, balanced against those moments was a growing sense of empowerment. Each rent payment received was a brick laid on the foundation of my reclaimed self-worth. I slept more peacefully, walked with steadier steps, and spoke with a tone tempered not by fear, but by newfound authority. Neighbors and acquaintances noticed the change too, offering quiet congratulations or simply pausing to acknowledge the woman who was no longer willing to be invisible. The struggle to assert myself was far from over, but the initial victories, both tangible in ownership and intangible in spirit, fed an inner fire that refused to be quenched. This act of breaking the cycle was neither loud nor dramatic, but its impact rippled through every corner of my life. It was the clearest statement I could make, that I mattered, that I was no longer the family's invisible shadow, but a force to be reckoned with. The road ahead promised challenges, but with each step I forged a new path, grounded in self-respect and quiet power. As I looked forward, I understood that the journey I began was not just about property or money, but about soul-deep recognition. The ownership of the building was a metaphor for reclaiming myself, a woman who had weathered storms of neglect and invisibility and was now stepping into the light of her own life. The future remained uncertain, filled with complex emotions and shifting relationships, but I embraced it with a fierceness I had never known. I was no longer the silent sacrifice or the extra mouth. I was a woman standing tall, owning her space, and ready to build a life worthy of all she had endured. The days that followed my purchase of the store building were filled with a storm of emotions and confrontations that I had anticipated but was not prepared to fully endure. The moment I handed over the deed and told my daughter and her husband that I now owned the property, the fragile facade of family harmony shattered, revealing raw wounds and buried resentments that had long been hidden beneath years of silence and obligation. My daughter's reaction was immediate and fierce. Her voice cracked with a mixture of disbelief, betrayal, and anger. "How could you do this to us? After everything I've done, you just want to hurt me?" she demanded, her eyes pleading for a reason beyond what she could understand. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," I replied calmly but with conviction that surprised even me. "I'm taking back what is mine, and what I should have had all along. I'm asking for respect, nothing more." Her husband's approach was colder, more strategic. "You're making this personal, beyond what any of us can accept. You think doubling the rent is fair? It's selfish, ungrateful, after all we've done." These words stung, but what hit me the hardest was the insinuation that I was selfish for wanting fairness, ungrateful for wanting dignity, and crazy for asserting myself. Their words were weapons shaped by decades of seeing me as a source of support, rather than a person with needs and rights. The pressure was relentless. Phone calls flooded in, filled with guilt-tripping accusations and veiled threats. "You're tearing this family apart. Why are you turning your back on us now? We did everything for you, and this is how you repay us?" Each message and call was a relentless tide meant to wear down my resolve. Some were from extended family members or longtime friends who had been silent witnesses to my sacrifices, but now chose convenience over truth, urging me to reconcile and make peace. Despite the tidal wave of manipulation and emotional blackmail, I stood firm. Every call unanswered was a brick in the wall I was building around my new sense of self. I was learning to say no, to establish boundaries that had never existed before. There were attempts at mediation, relatives and acquaintances stepping in to keep the peace by encouraging me to relent, to forgive, to forget. But these efforts only reinforced how deep the wounds ran. At one point, a close family friend, who had once supported me, even questioned my motives, asking gently but firmly, "Are you sure this is the right path? Maybe you're letting pride blind you." I felt moments of doubt, briefly slipping into old patterns where I questioned myself. Was I truly standing up for myself? Or was I burning bridges that could never be rebuilt? These doubts were quickly pushed aside by a burgeoning self-awareness. I understood that if I retreated now, I would be surrendering not only to others' demands, but also to a lifetime of invisibility and disregard. The fight was mine to win. Isolation became a recurring companion. Friends I once shared meals with grew distant. Family gatherings became battlegrounds or places I was simply absent from. The social cost of my stand was high, and loneliness, a familiar shadow, crept closer than ever. Yet within that solitude, I found a strange comfort. I was no longer trapped by expectations or suffocated by the weight of unasked-for responsibilities. I had the space to breathe, reflect, and rebuild. Creating new boundaries was both liberating and terrifying. I learned to decline invitations that drained me, to say no to demands that once felt mandatory. Small acts of self-care, turning off my phone, taking long walks alone, sitting quietly with a book, became revolutionary. One heart-wrenching confrontation stood out. My daughter, overwhelmed by the upheaval, attacked not just my decisions but my character, accusing me of selfishness and ingratitude in a painful public way. "I gave you everything. How could you do this? Destroy what we built," she cried. I met her gaze without flinching for the first time. What I gave was silent sacrifice. What I asked for is recognition. It's not destruction to demand respect. That moment marked a turning point, not in reconciliation, but in my emergence as someone who no longer accepted mistreatment. It was painful, raw, and necessary. As the weeks stretched into months, I felt myself growing stronger. The tension between family loyalty and personal dignity became a defining focus. I discovered that saying no was not a betrayal, but an act of self-preservation. In this process, I also faced heartbreak. Relationships I believed were unbreakable crumbled or became tenuous. But in their place, I began to imagine connections based on honesty and mutual respect, not sacrifice and silence. My days were punctuated by moments of despair and resilience. There were nights when loneliness gnawed deeply, but also mornings when I woke with quiet hope, fueled by the knowledge that I was no longer invisible. I started to build a new identity, one that included boundaries, self-care, and strength. It was not easy or neat. Mistakes were made, words said in anger or fear. But each mistake was a step in learning how to live authentically. My journey was not a straight path, but a winding, sometimes chaotic road toward freedom. And though the social and emotional costs were high, the reward, the reclaiming of my dignity and self-worth, was worth every struggle. I remain aware that the pushback from those I love could return at any moment, that old patterns could threaten to pull me back into silence and sacrifice. But I have tasted the strength that comes from standing firm, and I am not willing to give it up. This was not just a battle for property or money. It was a deep fight for my soul, and in that fight, I found myself again. While navigating the storm that followed my declaration of ownership and rent increase, I stumbled upon a discovery that redefined my entire understanding of the past, a long-hidden truth that had remained buried beneath layers of silence and sacrifice. It came unexpectedly, tucked away in an old box of forgotten keepsakes I had stored in the farthest corner of my apartment. Among faded photographs and brittle letters, I found a sealed envelope addressed to me in handwriting I recognized immediately, my late mother's. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the fragile paper within. As I read, a mixture of emotions flooded over me. Shock, sorrow, anger, but also a profound sense of relief. The letter unveiled secrets long concealed from me, choices made behind closed doors, betrayals carefully hidden beneath the guise of family loyalty, and truths about my own history that explained the patterns I had lived through. It revealed that some of the sacrifices I had thought were mine alone had been influenced or even orchestrated by others. Motives masked by love but fraught with control and manipulation. The revelation recontextualized years of pain and self-denial, actions I had accepted as inevitable or as noble acts of devotion now revealed themselves as parts of a larger web of manipulation, threads woven to keep me compliant and invisible. The kindness I had confused for unconditional love was often conditional, tied to unspoken expectations that demanded my silence and submission. The guilt I carried, a constant companion through decades of sacrifice, was not mine to bear. As I sat in my modest apartment, clutching the letter, my breath hitched and tears blurred my vision. The world felt simultaneously larger and smaller, as if the truth had shattered some illusions, but also opened a path to freedom. The weight of years of misunderstanding lifted just enough to allow me to see myself with new eyes, not as a woman broken by neglect, but as one who had endured beneath circumstances far more complicated than I had understood. A vivid flashback overwhelmed me, a moment from my childhood when my mother sat beside me, speaking softly but with a certain coldness veiled as care. Back then, I had seen only love and protection. Now, the memory took on new meaning as the first link in a chain of control and hidden agendas. I realized that the roots of the patterns I'd struggled to break were planted long before the sacrifices I made as an adult. This revelation did not imprison me further, but instead became a key to unlocking years of confusion and pain. I felt a complex swirl of emotions, rage at the deception, sorrow for lost time, but also a gentle compassion for the flawed people who had shaped my story, including myself. Understanding became a balm, softening the harsh edges of betrayal and offering a path toward healing. In the days that followed, I revisited the letter repeatedly, each reading peeling back more layers of understanding. I pondered what to do with this truth. It was a heavy burden but also a vital gift, a chance to rewrite my narrative, not as a victim, but as a survivor who held her own power. Sitting alone, I allowed myself to grieve the years lost, to silence and hidden pain. The quiet room absorbed my whispered sorrows and meant no judgment. Slowly, I began to weave the revelation into my ongoing journey toward the self-respect and independence. The realization brought clarity to my recent struggles, the betrayals at the store, the emotional blackmail, and the sharp isolation I felt. The knowledge gave me strength to stand firmer in my boundaries and face those who questioned my choices with unshakable resolve. Though I knew some family ties might never mend, I found peace in finally owning my truth. The discovery released me from the fog of confusion that had clouded my heart for so long, allowing me to step more clearly into the future I was determined to build. That moment marked more than just the uncovering of a secret. It was a turning point in my metamorphosis, a moment of awakening that fused past pain with present power. It reminded me that understanding myself fully, with all my scars and stories, was the foundation upon which I could stand tall. The letter, carefully placed back in its envelope, became a silent witness to my transformation. Its presence assured me that my journey was rooted in truth, no longer shadowed by unspoken lies. With this newfound clarity, I embraced the difficult but honest road ahead. I was no longer a shadow past endured or a silent sacrifice. I was a woman awakening to her own story, ready to claim every chapter with courage and grace. The discovery did not erase the hardships or erase the wounds, but it reframed them, turning them into stepping stones toward freedom and self-love. It was a gift of profound liberation, a reminder that truth, no matter how painful, has the power to heal and transform. I resolved to carry this truth with me, a steady flame in the darkness, guiding me through the complexities of family, forgiveness, and my own self-discovery. This was no longer just survival. It was rebirth. The morning of the confrontation arrived with a gray sky and a chilling stillness that seemed to echo the weight inside me. In the small kitchen of my modest apartment, the space that had once held quiet meals, whispered hopes, and the daily rhythm of life, everything felt different. It was as if the walls themselves were bracing for the storm that was about to break, a storm long overdue, born on years of silence, sacrifice, and invisible wounds. She came in first, her eyes hard and searching, reflecting a tangled mix of anger, confusion, and betrayal. Her posture was defensive, her fists clenched as if ready for battle. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence thick and suffocating. Then she broke it with a voice cracked and raw from emotion. "How could you?" she demanded. "How could you buy the building, double the rent, and tear apart the family you once promised to protect? Do you have any idea what this means? You're destroying us." I steadied myself against the tidal wave of confrontation. "I'm not here to destroy," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "I am here to claim what was always mine. The respect and dignities I forfeited for years of silent service. I was made invisible, dismissed as an extra burden. I am no longer willing to be invisible. I'm here, I matter, and I demand to be seen." Her eyes narrowed, disbelief mingling with fury. "You're selfish, ungrateful. After all the years we supported you, cared for you. This is your gratitude? This is your reward?" Each word stung like a lash, but beneath the words, a quiet strength swelled. Born not of anger, but of a hard-fought awakening. "I sacrificed more than you know, not for thanks, but because I loved you. I lost my voice, my dreams, myself. I bent myself so far I nearly broke. But this ends now." She took a step closer, her body trembling with emotion. "You think this will heal anything? You're driving us apart. You're destroying the family." "No," I replied firmly. "I'm shattering the silence that's been poisoning us. True healing can't begin until we face the truth, no matter how painful." The exchange unfolded in jagged fragments, voices rising and falling with raw intensity. "You're ruining everything." "I'm saving myself." "You were our anchor." "I'm finding my ground." Her anger wavered, tears leaked down her cheeks, but clarity was shadowed by bruising hurt. I wasn't seeking forgiveness. I was reclaiming my agency. "I will no longer shrink to fit into roles crafted to silence me," I declared. "I will live openly, fully, without apology." The space between us was heavy with memories, with years of longing, sacrifice, and unspoken disappointed hopes. The weight of past neglect pressed down, but the crack had been made. A fissure of truth now ran wide. When words finally ceased, I turned away, each step a release from the shadows, cast by decades of invisibility. Outside, the crisp morning air filled my lungs, invigorating, as if the light itself whispered promises of renewal. The burden I bore had lessened, replaced by a profound sense of resolve. That day was not an ending, but the beginning of transformation, a rupture with silence and invisibility. I was no longer the silent martyr, the overlooked presence. I was a woman standing firmly and unapologetically in her truth. The road ahead was daunting, uncertain and steep, yet with each step, I carried a fierce flame of self-respect and courage, a beacon cutting through the fear and isolation. The pain of that confrontation would linger like a scar, but it was a testament to bravery, a signal of rebirth. With a heart unbound from past chains, I stepped into an unfolding future, a future crafted by resilience, honesty, and a fierce embrace of my worth. The months that followed the confrontation marked the birth of a new life, one where I reclaimed space, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. My small apartment, once a silent refuge filled with shadows of past sacrifices, transformed with me. Walls once dull and neglected took on light and warmth. I painted them soft shades of blue, a color that reminded me of clarity and calm. The worn curtains were replaced with gentle, flowing fabrics that caught the sunlight and danced quietly in the breeze. Each morning I lit a single candle on the windowsill, a small ritual that connected me to the flame of my own rebirth. I began building a life centered on reciprocity instead of sacrifice, on mutual respect instead of silence. Relationships I had once believed unbreakable either evolved or fell away, their places gradually filled with new, nourishing connections. I found kindred spirits in unexpected places. A neighbor who shared her garden's bounty, a local librarian who introduced me to books I hadn't dared to read before, a small support group of women who understood the quiet battles we fought daily. These relationships, fresh and unforced, breathed new life into my days. I learned to ask for help and give in return, balancing my needs with theirs in a dance that felt both foreign and deeply healing. The contrast between my past and present was striking. Where once my world had been muted, a tarnished blend of gray and shadow, now it shimmered in vibrant colors. I savored the scent of fresh coffee each morning, the soft rustle of leaves outside my window, the comforting weight of a warm blanket against crisp evenings. Days were punctuated by small joys, the smile of a stranger, the taste of a homemade meal, the quiet accomplishment of setting boundaries and standing firm in them. Though the past was always present in my memory, it no longer held dominion over my spirit. I honored my history, not with regret or bitterness, but with acceptance and a gentle recognition of how far I had come. I had learned that healing was neither linear nor swift. It came in waves, in quiet moments of reflection, in the courage to say no, in the patience to rebuild trust slowly and deliberately. My deepest needs, those long buried under layers of obligation and neglect, were finally finding space to breathe. I nurtured my creativity by taking a painting class, the colors and textures allowing me to express feelings words had failed to capture. I set aside time each day for meditation and journaling, practices that anchored me to my inner strength and carried me through moments of doubt. At times the road was daunting, old fears rose like shadows, and loneliness crept in to test my resolve. But each challenge was met with a renewed commitment to myself. I was no longer defined by the label of extra mouth or by the sacrifices I had made at the expense of my own well-being. I was whole, worthy, and free. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood by my open window watching the sky drip with gold and purple, feeling the cool breeze caress my skin. In that moment, I understood the full meaning of my journey. I was a woman reborn, not through grand gestures or dramatic upheavals, but through steady, deliberate acts of self-love and courage. I whispered to myself, I am enough. These words, simple and profound, carried the weight of a lifetime of pain and the promise of a future lived fully in my own light. As night fell, the city lights twinkled softly beneath my window, a constellation of possibilities stretching before me. The past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. I was the author of my own story now, writing each page with intention, strength, and grace.